Hey everybody, this is Daniel. Welcome back. I hope you're taking care of yourself in these difficult times. I want to continue our series of Dear White Folks. This is a series devoted to people who didn't know a lot about racism before these protests. You were raised in such a way that you didn't realize that racism was as prevalent as it is today. And so you want to learn more. You're reading books, you're having conversations with people, and so you are looking to educate yourself on this. This series is meant to give you some bite-sized ideas that you can kind of take in and digest and add to your learning. So today I want to talk about this idea of colorblindness, particularly when people say, I don't see color, or I don't see race, or I'm colorblind, or the one I've heard all my life, I don't even see you as black. And people have said this to me my entire life. I've heard this from white people. I've probably heard it from non-white people as well. And so I'm not here to judge the people who say that as much as help you understand why it is not good to be colorblind. And particularly, I want to dive into three kind of subtopics of why this is the case. The first is that colorblindness actually ignores racism, okay? And because it ignores racism, it facilitates racism. Second, it ignores the victims of racism, okay? And the third thing is that it actually prevents you from being able to see yourself or anyone else. So that's a lot. So let me just break all of them down. Let's start with how colorblindness causes you to ignore racism. And look, I get it. I think people struggle to understand that when you grow up as a white person, you're not really taught to see race unless you are in community with black people, indigenous folks, and people of color. And so you don't grow up thinking that you're white. You just grow up thinking of yourself as a person, like that's not tied to a particular race or ethnicity. You probably just grow up seeing yourself as an American. You probably tie to your nationality more than you do your like a race or ethnicity. And so when you grow up thinking like that, and then people start talking about racism, you're like, well, I don't think I've been racist. And that's because I didn't focus on it. I don't think about it. So maybe if other people stop thinking about it or talking about it or focusing on it, then maybe that will be the end of racism. Maybe that's how it will stop. And again, this is why I'm not trying to be judgmental, because I understand that thought process, even though it is completely wrong. It is completely inaccurate. In fact, being colorblind actually facilitates racism, because when you blind yourself to people's races or ethnicities, whichever term you want to use, then you can't see the afflictions and the oppression and the suffering they face because of their skin color and their ethnicity. You can't see it because you've blinded yourself to the very idea of race, which means you can't see racism. And so when you think to yourself, oh, well, if we don't talk about it or focus on it, it'll go away. That's actually not how racism works. In fact, racism likes your colorblindness, because racism says, oh, you're not looking for this. You're not paying attention to this. This is great. I can go ahead and keep destroying people's lives. And that's exactly what racism does when people tell themselves that the solution is just to be blind to it. This leads us into the second topic, which is that it leads you to ignore the victims of racism. Because here's the thing, if you don't see race or ethnicity or skin color, then you don't see people as they fully are. And so that means that when people say, hey, this is how the police are treating me, and here's the data to back it up, and here's the history to back it up, and here's all the systemic violence and racism that we face because we're black, because we're indigenous, because we're people of color. If you don't see that they are black people and indigenous people and people of color, then you're not going to see the affliction that is directly tied to their identities that they did not ask for, by the way. Like, I love being black, but I didn't ask for it. I didn't go to the committee meeting before I was born and say, yo, can you just mark me as black? And so if you can't see that, if you can't see who people really are, you can't see the affliction and the suffering they face for who they are. Which means that not only are you ignoring racism, you are now ignoring the victims of racism. And this is not probably what you meant to do. When you talked about being colorblind to race, your idea was probably, well, I think this is how we can solve the issue. The last thing that you thought was that you would actually be a facilitator of racism. Because at the very least, if you can't see the victims of racism, you can't help the victims of racism. Okay? You can't stop it if you don't even see it. And you have to be careful, because if you don't see racism, if you've blinded yourself, then at the very least you can't see it and help. But it could become something even worse, where you are now actually aiding and abetting racism because you were so blind to it. Now, let me get to the third thing, because this is something that I haven't seen in other places. Maybe scholars have talked about this, but this is something from my own experience. When you are colorblind, you don't see people for who they really are. And therefore, you can't ever know yourself. And that's important. I want to take a minute on this. If you don't see people's skin color, then you can never fully understand and appreciate who a person is. So, for example, I'm black. Okay, I'm blackity black. And I love being black. That's part of who I am. But if you ignore the fact that I am black, then you are cordoning yourself off, I think that's the word, from being able to understand who I fully am as a person. Because what you're doing is you're saying, hey, look, I don't see you as black, so I'm not really looking to engage with the parts of your identity that are tied to your ethnicity or your skin color, your race. Okay, so I only am trying to engage with the parts of you that are not tied to that. But black culture is a key part of who I am. Okay, and so you're missing who I really am, all that I really am, because you only want to see like a part of it, an approved part of it. Okay, and here's the thing: what you don't realize that you're doing, because no one told you were doing this, is that you are actually perpetuating white supremacy in a way. And you don't even know it. You're not trying to do it, but you are, because you're dictating what aspects of a person's identity are quote unquote acceptable, what parts are worth talking about. Because if you ignore like who a person fully is, you're in essence saying that those parts of that person are not acceptable. And who put it in your mind to think that those parts of a person are not optimal or ideal or acceptable? And that's the question you got to think about. Because here's the other thing. If you take it back on yourself, then what you'll realize is that this system of white supremacy, of systemic racism, actually prevents you from ever fully understanding who you are. Because see, when you don't see yourself as a white person, if you are white and you're watching this video, or a black person, or indigenous, or a person of color, when you don't see yourself as that being an important part of your identity, then you can never fully engage with the society in which you live. And I'm primarily talking through an American lens, an American mindset. You can't fully understand who you are. And you can't fully understand the society in which you live. You can't be the best person you could be in the American society if you, as a white person, don't understand that you're white and what it means to be white in America. Because I'll tell you something. Black folks like me, indigenous folks, people of color, we don't get to ignore that we're black. If I took your advice, okay, and I were to try to be colorblind, I might get killed over that. Because all it takes is one stop by a police. It doesn't have to be legitimate. He could just pull me over because I was, quote, in the wrong neighborhood. Or she pulled me over. And if I don't understand deeply what it means to be black in that situation, one of us will probably die. And it will most likely be me. See, that's what you have to understand. This is not an abstract conversation. This is real. And this has real, tangible life or death consequences. And so in summary, I want to say this. If a doctor was trying to cure a disease, the doctor wouldn't come into the room and do a diagnosis and say, okay, the best way we could cure your disease is to just ignore it. Pretend like we don't see it. And just go in there and do surgery and we'll see what happens. Nobody would go back to that doctor. And so if we are going to properly diagnose America and the systemic racism that is has gone and permeated throughout all of our major institutions, and even the minor ones, then for us to do that and really do the work of cutting this all away so that we can have a better America, we're not going to be able to do that by pretending that we don't see systemic racism, by pretending that we don't see police brutality, by pretending that we don't see misogynoir behavior. We're not going to be able to handle these if we pretend like they're not there. The only way we can really make America better and get rid of systemic racism, really get to the root at it, is we have to look it dead in the face and allow that process to shape us and mold us into the people who will truly get rid of it so that our children and our grandchildren don't have to live with this anymore. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to your feedback. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.